let's continue to build the overview of our hotel. So the first thing I want to do is to add a border to the bottom of this element here. So a small gray line such as the header has, or should have, because it doesn't have the line here that it should have. And so probably something's going wrong there. So let's check that out. So right here in the layout, the header, border bottom. Oh, okay, so I only specified the color. Of course, I also have to specify the width and the type. So 1 pixel solid. And it's actually the exact same one that I want here on the hotel overview. Yeah, now that's better. So now you see the border here, separating the header from the rest of the page. And that's especially visible here on this image, which is also white on the top. And then here we have it in the overview as well. Next, we should probably vertically center these 4 elements in this box. And so we're going to use Flexbox, which we already have active here, and using the align items property, right? So aligning the items along the cross axis. And we want center, and with one simple line of CSS, all of this is now vertically aligned. Next up is the header, or the heading. So font size, I chose 2.25 rem here. As a font weight, we only want 300. So big text, but small font weight. Then text transform to uppercase, and also a very slight letter spacing of 1 pixel. That makes it look slightly better. And then of course some padding here to give it some breathing space around it. And 1.5 rem top and bottom, and 3 left and right. And so let's take a look at that. All right, and that looks a lot better already. And you saw that all of the items, of course, automatically adjusted and are still vertically centered. And so next up are our stars. And for some reason, you see that they are not 100% vertically aligned. And so let's take a look at that. Right, so this here is the element, so the container of these stars. And you see that there's like a small space below each of the stars. And that happens because these SVG elements, they behave like inline elements. And so it's a bit like text, and that produces that small white space that we see here. We can remove that by setting the line height and the font size to 0, for example, but we have a simpler way of doing that. And that is by simply setting their parent element to Flexbox. So just do display flex, and so all of these icon star elements, so these here, they will now become flex items, and then that space will be gone. And there you see it. So you see that now this parent element, which is now a flex container, has the exact same height as the stars themselves. And so now it's vertically centered perfectly. And also they are now really nicely side by side, which they weren't before. So let's take that out. So that's without flex, and that's with flex. And so that looks a lot better. Next up, let's actually format this inline button here, okay? So that is a whole new component, right? So it's called button inline here. So let's create a new component for that one. I also want a comment here. And so button inline. So first thing is we want to remove the border of this button, because these buttons by default always come with this border, and we don't want that, of course. Then we want the color to be the primary color. And we want a font size of, actually we want it to be inherit. Okay, and why is that? Well, let me show you the example here. So in this case, for example, the text is really small, and down here where we use it again, it's bigger. And so we do that by setting one font size here on this parent element. So for example, this huge parent element here. And then we can also set a font size on the parent element of this button. And then all we have to do is to set the font size on that button itself to inherit. And so by that, it becomes a bit more modular, more reusable. Next, we wanted to have a border at the bottom. of 1 pixel, solid, and now is the time where I'm going to use current color again. Okay, and that's because this way the border will have the exact same color as the text, and that's what we want. And later when I then add the hover effect, which I can actually do right now, all I have to say then is that I want the color to be the dark gray. So color, gray, dark 1. So all I have to do is to change the text color in the hover state, and then the border will automatically update as well, right? So let's check that out. And so here you go. As we hover the button, the border becomes the exact same color as the text. So without current color, I would now have to add another line here and say border bottom, and then also with this gray color. But with current color, we don't have to do anything like that. And that's great. So next we want a small padding at the bottom as well of 2 pixels, so to create some space between the text and the border. And also we want this to be displayed as an inline block and not just as inline. And I saw that the background was this weird gray, and I also don't want that. So background color, and I'm gonna set it to transparent. And so once again, this helps making the button a bit more modular, because here in this case, for example, it is on a gray background, but here it's on a white background. And so we don't want to attribute a fixed color for that background. Okay, now all you have to do is to set the cursor to pointer and then add the transition, of course. So transition all 0.2 seconds. So that is the basic functionality. So it works great. But remember that we also had this focus effect. So this animation effect here. And I put it here so that I can show you another cool thing with animations. Okay, so let me show that to you. So focus, and the first thing is outline none, which is going to remove that default blue border. And then we have to actually create that pulsating animation that we just saw. Okay, so that is a CSS animation using the keyframes add rule. All right, because we have no way of doing that with a transition animation. And so we write what we want to happen using the keyframes add rule. Okay, so keyframes, and I'm going to call this animation pulsate. And then I define what happens at the beginning, at the end, and also in the middle. So we have 3 states here. So one at 0, one at 50% of the time, and then 100%. So let's take a close look at what actually happens here so that we can code up this animation. So basically in the beginning nothing happens. Then in the middle it is scaled up a little bit and it has this shadow going on. And then in the end it goes back to the normal. And so that's what we have to code up here. So the state in the middle basically is just a transform with a scale. So we scale this just a little bit, like 1.05, and we also give it a very small box shadow, like 0, 1 rem, 4 rem for the blur, and then the color of black with 0.25 opacity. And then what we have to do is to of course set the initial and the final state to the normal state. So scale of 1 and no box shadow. And that's very easy. We just use the non keyboard. And at the end, it's exactly the same. Okay, so in the beginning, we have no scale and no box shadow. Then at 50%, we scale it up a little bit, give it a shadow, and then 100% back to normal. And now all we have to do is to add our animation property. So animation pulsate 1 second. But that is actually not enough, because look at what happens when we do that. So I'm going to click now, and it happened, but it only happened once, of course. I can click again, and then it's going to happen again, but I want it to be infinite. And so all we have to do is to actually add the word infinite. And so that is going to create an infinite animation as long as the button is focused, of course. So this only applies in a focused state, of course. But right now it should already be working. And yeah, actually it is. So, great. So we have that part completed as well. And now we should probably define a font size for this parent element then, as I was saying before. And we should also vertically align these two elements. So moving back up here, we have the location, here it is. So let's give it a font size of 1.2 rem. And then we want to vertically align the two elements, the icon and the button. So of course we use Flexbox, display flex, and vertically align, center. And so by now you've used this so many times that I'm sure that it's becoming really familiar. Okay, now we should just give some space here to the right side here of this icon, so to create some space between these two. So actually we need this selector. So margin right, let's say 0.5 rem. Okay, and so now we have this part here completed as well. So all that's left to do is now this rating part. So let's do that. So first is the background color that you noticed to be our primary pink color. So color primary. Then also let's give it a margin to the right side to create that space between the location and the rating. So 3 rem. And actually it's not to the right, it's to the left, of course. And also it should have a white color. Okay, so color white. Okay, and now just for this text here, so the average is really big, so 2.25 rem, and then a smaller font weight, and then the count down there is a lot smaller. So font size 0.8 rem, and also I want it to uppercase. So let's take a look at that. And that looks pretty good already. We just need some padding here on the left and right side. And of course, this should stretch the entire height of the parent container, right? So going from up here all the way down here. So how do we do that? Take a moment and think about how we can do that, okay? So have you figured it out? Well, it's actually the exact same situation that we had up here with these elements, right? We also wanted them to stretch all the way from the top to the bottom. And so that's what we need to do here. So we do that by setting the align self property, right? And we simply set it to stretch, because remember that all of these elements are aligned to the center because of this declaration that we have up here. And so now we override that here for this single element called rating and align it to the stretch. So basically make it stretch and occupy all the space that it has available for that. Okay, and now just about the padding that I was talking about. So we don't need any padding at top and bottom. We just need padding at the left and right side. So 2.25 rem. All right, and now what's left to do is to center these two both horizontally and vertically here in this container. So my favorite tool for that is of course Flexbox. So display, flex, and I'm going to say align items to center and justify content to center as well. But now you will probably think that there will be a problem with this, and that is absolutely true, because they will now be side by side, right? So the elements are side by side and no longer on top of each other. And that's exactly what Flexbox does. It lays out the flex items in a row. But remember that we can change that, right? And so all we have to do is to set flex direction to column. And that's actually it. So let's see, and here we go. So in the main axis, the justify content aligns these elements to the center, so in that direction there to the center, and then along the cross axis, which is now this, align items also centers the elements. And so that's what we end up with. Now I just want to slightly decrease the space between these two, and that's very simple. So I can simply set a negative margin to the bottom, so like -3 pixels. And yeah, so that looks more consistent, looks better. So let's compare it to our original result. And yeah, it's actually exactly the same, right? So it looks pretty similar. And so yeah, we're done with this part of the interface. It looks great, right? I think it's absolutely fantastic, really beautiful. And I hope that you think the same and that you're really proud of all the work that you have accomplished so far in this section. So great job. I hope you're learning lots of Flexbox and I hope you're really enjoying this project. If you want to continue with it right now, then let's just move on to the next video.